Hey, everybody, we're back with a brand new podcast, and today we're going to be talking about how public perception of reality, of facts, can be easily manipulated and has been for years now with increasing sophistication. What the public believes is true as opposed to reality, and the techniques that are employed by the government and perhaps some nefarious organizations that we're not aware of. And among the most recent manipulations that is in mainstream media this week, in fact, is how all the Biden administration officials, when asked about a recession, they're saying that we're not in a recession or about to enter one, and the traditional this doesn't fit the traditional definition of a recession no longer applies. And Mark Collingsworth of Vere Global Financial Wealth Management, who's a finance expert, is with us, along with Rack Attack of the Rack Attack Gamer YouTube channel, who's on board with all things conspiratorial in terms of what's really going on. We'll start with Mark, though. So Mark, you're the economist. Does what's happening now in our economy, does that fit the traditional definition of a recession?
Correct. Two back-to-back quarters of negative GDP is technically a recession. Them saying that they don't think that applies to this situation. I mean, let's face it, the Biden administration hasn't done anything right in the last 2 years. They can't come out and have a recession, so let's call it something else. But they're disconnected because they're saying it's not a recession, but the person on the street is really feeling it, whether you say it or not.
Other examples is Mayorkas says that the Homeland Security says the border is secure, the border is closed, and you can see thousands are pouring over every day. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was really a triumph of logistical majesty, how they removed so many people so quickly, supposedly. And crime is not out of control. The stats are wrong. Issue after issue, they're saying that, don't believe your lying eyes, believe what I'm telling you. So, Rack, how are they doing this? They've been doing it for some time, but I think it's increasing in frequency and sophistication. So, what's the scoop?
Let me share my screen. The overall terminology is gaslighting for what they are doing currently. I mean, they just tell you a lie, look you square in the eye, and they repeat that lie over and over and over again until even though you might see opposing evidence, they will just continue to lie straight to your face until you believe them and think you're off base. That's gaslighting.
Well, it's also called a big lie, isn't it?
Well, the big lie is supposedly put to Trump and his suggestion that the election was manipulated. That's their terminology for Trump's big lie.
Well, I think it applies more generally, too, that you just keep repeating something over and over again, forcefully enough, frequently enough, and eventually people accept it.
Well, I mean, it's been said that way by social engineers of the past. I forget the Goebbels, maybe. I forget who said that. But that's almost Go ahead, Mark. What?
As Adolf Hitler.
Was it Hitler that said it, or was it Goebbels, his propaganda minister?
I think the official quote actually goes to Hitler.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, what we're talking about overall is social engineering. And if you do it with a military slant to it, it's called psychological operations. So what I was going to do is give you a little quick background of the whole thing, the whole gambit of manipulation of society. And let's start with the Stanford prison experiment, because it is the least one that I'm trying to head towards. So we'll just kind of get it out of the way. Stanford prison experiment was conducted in 1971, and as you can see here, by Dr. Philip G. Zimbardo. And what they did was they had a university, and they advertised to get a group of people, men, to volunteer to do an experiment. And let's suppose they had 20 men. I don't know what the exact number is, but let's just say 20. And what they did was they randomly split that group up into two, and they called one the guards, and they called the other group the prisoners. And they did a mock prison experiment. The prisoners were put into cells and the guards were there to guard them. Now, the overall end of this is where I'm going to head right towards. I mean, there was a lot of interesting things in the middle of it, but let's head towards the end of it. What they found out is that the guards would turn very violent, very manipulative, very masochistic. I'm sorry, sadistic, not masochist, sadistic. And they would treat the prisoners very badly. And the prisoners, what they found out, would, unfortunately accept their conditions, or sometimes try to talk with each other and figure out ways to improve their condition. But what is seen here is any dictator's manipulation of troops or whatever. You put people in power, you give them nice shiny uniforms with nice badges, and they will eat that up. They themselves, through some sort of ego or whatever, will fall into that role and treat people badly. Now, how does that apply to what I'm getting at here today? Not so much, although you can see it with certain groups that have power over other groups that do not have power. And let me continue on to a different experiment.
Well, hold on a minute, Rex. So, as I recall, the psychology behind that experiment was that even people who would not ordinarily be sadistic found it was surprisingly easy for them to fall into that pattern. And part of that was because they were told, they're in authority, and then the groupthink and all that. It was something like that, wasn't it? Where ordinary people who are not ordinarily nasty to others became that way before too long.
That is correct, and it would make you wonder what happens to career politicians with all that power.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's continue. Now, the ones that are starting to head towards more of what I'm talking about with social engineering is the Milgram Experiment. The Milgram Experiment, I will explain it like this, is that they have a subject. The subject does not know what's going on, and everybody else does. Now, what they did with the subjects, they pull them in. They have a guy dressed in a white lab coat, carrying a clipboard. This is the authority figure. They never tell the guy that this is a doctor or anything else like that. They just have him in with a white lab coat and a clipboard. They suggest it to the guy, but they never tell him what kind of authority figure this person is. Then they have a machine set up which is supposed to deliver electric shock given by the subject in increasing value. So as you can see at the bottom of this picture, there's a row of buttons, a series of buttons, and that represents the increasing electrical charge given to another subject in a different room, hidden from view of the actual subject that is going to be flipping these switches. So let me continue. Here is a photo of a subject that is currently trying to flip a switch. And what happens is this. Let me go to this next one. In the other room, this person walks past the subject. He's in on it. All these people are in on it. The subject is not. He walks past the person in the room. They say hello. He goes into this separate room where the subject cannot see him. And they tie him up to these electrical things or whatever that they're nonsense. They don't do anything. And here's the guy with the white lab suit. And what they do is the guy with the white lab suit comes back out and tells the subject, okay, we're going to do an experiment with electric shock. So go ahead and administer the lowest amount of electric shock, which would be almost nothing. And in the other room, the guy goes, oh, and he gets a little bit of a shock, supposedly, from his reaction. He's not getting any shock in reality, but this person does not know it, the subject. And the guy with the white lab suit coat continues to tell him to continue up the line of switches, which one is more and more of an electric charge. And they would have it written on it what electric charge, 9 volts, 18 volts, et cetera, all the way up to like 300, 400, 500 volts. And as this subject continues on, he starts to hear in the other room the guy being more and more affected by the electric shocks. So as they get up to say mid-range, the guy's going, oh, that hurts, oh. And this guy starts to get worried and turns to the experimenter, the guy with the white lab coat, and says, you know, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing this. And the guy with the white lab coat doesn't tell him anything else except for, look, it's my authority. I take responsibility for it. You must continue this experiment. And the guy that is the subject goes, all right, okay, you know, let's keep going. And as they get up, you can hear the guy like really shouting in agony, etc. And the guy with the white, and of course, the subject is saying, here, let's stop this. And the guy with the white lab coat goes, nope, it's under my responsibility. The experiment must continue. Go on. And the guy continues on. Now we're getting to the point of death voltage, but the guy continues. Just because, and then now the moral of the story is this, just because he perceives this guy to be an authority figure, he listens to the guy, and he is willing to almost basically kill someone if he's told to do it. That's the moral of this experiment. Now, how would this apply to social engineering? Well, we perceive the media, the mainstream media, the news, the talking heads, the newspapers and AP and all this stuff, Reuters and whatever, as authorities. So whatever they tell us as a society, we'll be like, oh, yeah, okay. So that's how some of the trouble that we're in, that I believe we're in, is happening. But let's continue.
Well, it also plays out in terms of having people actually commit atrocities under the authority of somebody who says it's necessary, and you're required to do it, like following orders and all that. So yeah, I mean, it works on a much more basic and cruel level as well. You know, it's similar to 1984. In that, George Orwell depicted a futuristic oppressive society, dictatorial society, and the way they changed perceptions of reality, among the things they did was they'd, under duress of the subject they were manipulating, they were trying to brainwash, they present 2 + 2 equals what? The guy would originally say it equals 4. Are you sure? Well, yeah, of course it equals 4. And they kept up the pressure, and they kept saying, no, it equals 5. And eventually, the subject, not only because of the pain, but because of the confusion, accept the fact that 2 + 2 equals 5. So that was one of the examples that George Orwell spelled out in 1984. So that sort of thing applies too. With enough pressure and enough authority behind it, perceived authority, people could be manipulated into believing things that are, you know, totally illogical. But go ahead.
And for the Star Trek Next Generation fans out there, there was an episode that they would know that Picard was put into a situation like you're describing, where they had 4 lights, and he was supposed to say, he was being tortured to say there's 5 lights or something like that. But yeah, so all the Star Trek fans know that one.
Yeah, and the salient point there was that it wasn't just that the guy was going along with it to get out of the torture. Psychologically, after a while, something flipped in his head where he actually believed that 2 + 2 equals 5. It wasn't just to stop the torture, but there was an acceptance of it, an embrace of that, because of the whole universe of authority around him and what was actually reality. So that was a much more profound and troubling effect psychologically.
And spoiler alert for that particular Star Trek episode, that's exactly what happened to Picard at the end of it. He didn't go all the way to the end where he did say that it was 5 lights, although it was only 4. He didn't say it was 5, but he got rescued at that exact moment, and he went back to his own ship, and they were talking about it, and he goes, you know, the problem isn't that I was going to say that there was 5 lights. The problem is I actually saw 5 lights.
Yeah.
Or something to that effect. Anyway, that was the spoiler of it. All right, so let me reshare here and continue on. And while I'm bringing up this share, you made a good point about how this one could combine with the last one, and how police would do authoritative, like dictatorship type stuff against a citizenry where they shouldn't be doing it, because an authority figure tells them so, and because they also like the shiny badge and the power over people. So it could easily be done. And what I'm proposing is that the government knows this and they use these things
Yeah.
for their advantage.
But let's talk for a while here, at least. Much less drastic methods of controlling perception in the narrative. I mean, we see that with the mainstream media, where every mainstream, every major outlet except Fox in broadcast, and maybe the New York Post with print media, they're all on board with the same narrative, denying the reality. And most people, see, well, they say it, so it must be true. So, and part of that, I mean, it was a simple fix that the CIA admits to years ago, that anybody of note in the major media, they have control over, at least cooperation with. And since those days, now that was decades ago that they admitted it, since then it's just become more and more entrenched. So now you have, you turn the channels if you're just watching TV, and every outlet, major broadcast outlet except Fox, is giving you a certain narrative. And Fox, I think, despite their own slants on things and their own agenda, at least they're getting out some basic facts, covering basic stories that the other media is not. So, I mean, they're doing it as simply as that, just controlling the mainstream media without any other of these psychological techniques. What do you think, Mark?
I totally agree with that. Several things here. A lot of people do this psychological manipulation, don't even realize it. When you tell your kids you need to be good, or Santa Claus won't come to see you, you're using a type of social engineering right there. And I'm very curious, listening to what Rack's saying here is, you've heard, the Nazi prison guards who were told, well, we just did the stuff because we tortured people because our superiors told them to. How much did all these programs actually go into actually affecting their decisions, even though they knew it was wrong, but because of the psychological programming here, their psyche made them go ahead and go forth with it, even though they knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
What I think is happening is not so much that these people like the guards or whatever are being programmed. I'm not going along with that. What's happening here is that the psychological engineers are learning how to manipulate people. Their innate stuff. This is an innate feeling or ability within the people to do this, and the psychological engineers are uncovering this. And once they uncover it, they say, "Aha!" So that's how we can manipulate them.
And that's just going to say that let's not forget how much money did the CIA put into the MK Ultra program.
Yeah, well, something else that comes to mind, and this was actually reported, although briefly, and not by many outlets. I think it was during the George Bush Jr. Administration, during his campaign, W's campaign. They were inserting flash frames in some of the attack ads on TV against the opponents, which would be something entirely negative, that would convince somebody psychologically that the opponent was no good. They actually did that, and it got some play in the media, and then it wasn't reported on after that. But I remember it being reported, and I remember seeing the actual video with the freeze frame and all that. And that's a technique that's been well known, subliminal projection. Yeah. And they've used that in advertising over the years now, although supposedly it's been banned.
Correct. I think that
go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what you're referring to there, Larry, was I think in the 1950s, they were putting like a clip of cooked popcorn in between frames, so you couldn't see it, but subconsciously you saw that your brain picked up on the popcorn, even though it flashed low like one split second. And ironically, during those shows, there was a 15 to 20% increase in popcorn sales.
Yeah, those are in theaters where they show the shorts or the previews of coming attractions before the main movie. And they were actually doing that, and there was a definite increase in popcorn sales. So, I mean, there's all kinds of techniques that they've known about for years. Now, supposedly it's not being used anymore, but who knows?
Well, let me continue with my presentation, because I was going to actually head into all the stuff that we've just sort of discussed a little bit here. I was going to head there. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
All right, there's another experiment. This one's called the Ash Conformity Experiments. And what it is they would take a group of people, again, all of them are in on it except for one subject. The one subject would be placed at one certain end. It's either this guy or this guy. And they would have, and I'll show you this, they would have a series of lines set up where there would be a reference line and A, B, and C. And what the question was posed to the group was, what line is the equal line from the reference line? In other words, is it A, B, or C that is of equal length to the reference line? And they would go back to the subjects and they would question them in turn. And the subjects that, well, one subject, the others are in on it. The ones that are in on it were told to give the wrong answer. Now, not all the time, maybe the first time they gave the right answer, whatever, but they mix it up. And for my view here, it looks like C is the correct answer. But what would happen is these people would say that B was the same size as the reference line. And it would go to this person, he'd say B. This person would say, yeah, B. This person the same way, all the way down the line until it got to the last subject guy. And he'd be like, well, no, I don't see. Yeah, maybe. And he would conform to the rest of the group. And they proceeded to do this over and over again. Now, the first time he might have hemmed and hawed, but after that, he just went along with the group. Every time, whatever the group said, he didn't want to be the sore thumb sticking out. So he would go along with the group. And that was what they've learned. They learned that group pressure would find its way into conformity of people. And now this has many implications in the real world. Anyway, continuing on, psychological operations are done with militaries, persuade, change, and influence. Just keep that in mind. So this is an actual logo of psychological operations from the U.S. military. Social engineering, how do you manipulate the population to do what you want? And should you even be? But whatever. Let's see here. I can't switch screen. There we go. Is this it? No, this is just my. Okay. So we got that one. And lastly, one of their biggest methods that they use for social engineering is gaslighting. And I've already described it as you just flat out lie. You're giving a press conference. People are asking questions. You flat out lie to their face and you never waver from that lie. And eventually people believe it. This goes into, let me get another screen up here. This goes into the 45 Goals of Communism that I've talked about before. This was entered into congressional record in 1963. Now, I've had some highlighted. Capture one or both political parties of the United States. Now, if they actually did this and implemented it and captured a political party, which I believe they did, more heavily on the left and then on the right. Both sides have been captured, I believe, in some aspect. Get controls of schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism. Now, I'm not talking about socialism per se. I'm just talking about how they plan on doing things, how they plan on controlling people, getting control of all student newspapers. Why? So they can social engineer. Use student riots to foment public protests. It's another aspect of social engineering. You get the students to riot, people go along with it, and now pretty much it's the whole crowd going with it. Infiltrate the press. Here's a big one. Get control of book review, editorial writing, policy-making positions. Now, the press, as we already hit upon, about how they put their little editorial words in, and we'll get there a little bit later, too. Getting control of key positions of radio, TV, and motion pictures. So we're talking about even entertainment here. They throw their social engineering into. Continued discrediting American culture. We've seen that in society with the pulling down of statues and whatnot. Control art critics, directors, and art museums, break down cultural standards of morality, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Isn't that going on these days? I mean, this is written in the 50s, entered into the congressional record in 1963. discredit the American founding fathers. Isn't that what's happening today? Oh, that one owned slaves. That one owned slaves. Let's tear this statue down. Let's tear that statue down. Support any socialist movement. Bernie Sanders, ring a bell? Social Democrat for anybody?
Yeah.
Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Families have been falling apart for a while now. Emphasize the need to raise children away from negative influence of parents. So I believe, is that all I have? I think that's all I have. One other thing I didn't mention was the Smith-Month Act. It was an act. Here, let me stop this share. Okay, so the Smith-Month Act was an act of Congress that prevented the American government from propagandizing its own people. That was brought down and nullified during the Obama administration. So now, oh, you know what? I do actually have some more. Dang it, it goes to that effect of social engineering. Let me reshare one more thing. It's only a couple more seconds. This goes back to the media thing that I'm talking about. Currently, Alex Jones is under a trial, and it's what they call it. He's been proclaimed guilty by the judge. And the only thing with this trial is that they're going to figure out how much he has to pay. He had no actual trial to find out guilt or not. He had no jury trial or any other trial. The judge has proclaimed him guilty. All right, so what I want to say here is the first sentence, and I don't think you can see it, so I'll read a little bit of it. U.S. conspiracy theorist Alex Jones led a vile campaign of defamation when he falsely claimed the 2012 Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax. Look at his picture. Why would they choose this picture? Because he looks like a raving madman yelling. This is social engineering. These pictures, these words injected into the regular news that we read on a daily basis or see on TV, it is a constant influx, just pounding and pounding their narrative, the bad guy's narrative, in my opinion, and people are just eating it up. And this is where I wanted to go. This is the end of it here, is people have no clue about who Alex Jones is or what he's done or anything else like that. However, they all hate him. And in the comment section, over and over again, they're saying how bad he is. He should be bankrupted. He should be put in prison forever. And a couple were murder threats on his life in some of the comment sections. Now, why would those comment sections be so negative? Because Alex Jones has been presented negatively throughout the media in a horrible light to the point where some people think that he actually had something to do with Sandy Hook and killing the children or something. I mean, it's ridiculous.
All right, Rack, are you saying there was no trial? The judge simply declared him guilty, or did the trial begin and then something happened? There was no trial?
There was absolutely no trial for Alex Jones. What they did was they were trying to do discovery, and they asked Alex Jones to present the opposing party, the lawyers and whatnot, with all of his stuff. I mean, give us all your stuff. And what they were specifically looking for was his marketing numbers and etc. on Sandy Hook. Now, he is a fly by the seat of his pants type of news person. He sees news, he makes comments, he equates and analyzes. He does whatever he does by the seat of his pants. He doesn't pre-plan anything financially or anything else like that. So when he told them, I don't have these documents, they don't exist because I don't do it that way, they defaulted him for not providing them with these documents. And the judge says, oh, now I proclaim you guilty. But basically that was the gist of it. And, you know, this whole thing with Alex Jones and Trump is the same way. Look, in my opinion, I'll tell you what my opinion is. Trump was the good guy. Alex Jones is the good guy. Trump tried to run the country as best as he could. He did a lot for the economy, et cetera, but he was not this quote unquote new world order that I always talk about. He was not. So they had to get him out. They're not going to lose America to some schmuck that just happens to get in because of his popularity. The same thing with Alex Jones. Alex Jones is pointing out to people, hey, this is going on. These people are taking over. We're in trouble here. They don't want this out there. So they demonize him in the media. People eat it up. They hate his guts. And that's all there is to it.
Okay, getting back to a more basic technique or a basic way of controlling public opinion and information is if it's not reported in most people's minds, then it doesn't exist. And if they hear it elsewhere, well, it can't be true because it's not in the newspaper, it's not on TV.
Which goes towards the Milgram experiment, where they're looking for the authority figure to tell them what to think. Right. They don't even think for themselves anymore.
Right, and also there is an undue influence of the New York Times, which sets the standard nationwide. At least it had been up until Fox started attacking its credibility with good reason in many cases. But the way it worked with the New York Times, the so-called paper of record, even a lot of the TV stations, they would, in the mornings, they'd come in and see what's in the New York Times, and they would get their stories and a lot of their opinions from what was in the New York Times. And because it's such a respected paper, people assumed that it was accurate what was in the New York Times. And what was in the Times would be proliferating throughout the country because other news agencies across the country would be picking up on those stories that were in or not in the New York Times. So it had an undue influence because it was considered, again, getting back to the authority figure. So that's a prime example,
The whole reason why I wanted to talk about social engineering today is because people are being manipulated. We're losing our country. People are being manipulated. The powers that be, if you don't want to use the terminology of New World Order, the powers that be know about these experiments. They have tons of money. They can hire their own social engineers and psychiatrists and psychologists that could try to drive a populace in a certain way. I discussed one time, and I won't do a whiteboard. I was going to do a whiteboard on this, the diamond system of crowd control. And this usually goes with a group where a person is given a speech. He precedes the audience, front, both sides, and back in the shape of a diamond with his plans. When he makes points that he wants the audience to accept, he will have his people stand up and go, yeah, I believe that, yeah. And the people that are sitting that are not part of the scheme will be looking forward and seeing somebody's likes it, and then they're looking to their left because the other person stands up and say, yeah. Then they look into then they're looking in the back and they think, oh my, and then they go towards the Ash Conformity thing where they want to fit in. They want to fit in. So now they start believing it and they're like, yeah.
It's a cheerleader phenomenon. Cheerleaders get the audience stirred up, get them hyped up, get them, on the same page. But, again, at a much more basic level, without all these techniques that we're not even aware of, much more basic level is the way freedom of the press is being eroded, where they're not only just controlling the narrative, but they're preventing things from being published or expressed, not just on social media, but now in the major media outlets, in newspapers, radio, and TV, where there's certain parameters, that in effect you're forbidden to even mention. Even Fox News has been guilty of that. Now, I think Tucker Carlson is the most unfettered commentator on Fox News, but it's not all like this. I can remember last year, they had some other talking heads on, talking about what was going on, and Newt Gingrich brought up the influence of George Soros, and the two talking head hosts told him, well, we're not going to mention that. And Gingrich was now shocked. He says, well, I guess that's verboten. And they cut to some other subjects. I mean, blatantly on the air, we can't talk about George Soros. So even Fox News has boundaries that they don't exceed. I don't know how Tucker Carlson gets away with what he does, because he attacks Soros, attacks a lot of other people that the other talking heads and hosts and commentators will walk around very gingerly if they express anything at all.
I agree. 24/7. Yeah, let Mark go.
Yeah, Mark.
I think on Tucker, Tucker, I think he controls, if you take the most popular news stations, MSNBC, NBC, CNN, he totally crushes them. He's like the star that makes Fox News. And I know he's gotten other offers from like Newsmax and stuff like that. I think Fox News doesn't want to lose their big money maker on advertising because so many people tune in and listen to him. That gives them a lot more leeway to push the buttons.
Yeah. But you see, unless people really follow the news, or unless they're on board strongly with Trump, or with the conservative philosophy, they have no idea how manipulative the press has become. As I've said time and time again, they become cheerleaders and propagandists rather than objective reporters. And once you get that, where it becomes state news, the only information you get or misinformation is what the state allows. And we're headed that way. I think we're halfway there already. And once they establish that as the norm, then it's no longer a free press or a free country. It was the First Amendment, more so than any politicians, more so even than the military, that's kept this country free, because the military can be misused and manipulated by the politicians. It was that steadfast First Amendment which allowed you to express your opinion, to challenge a government, to state what you thought contrary to what the government told you, that really kept us somewhat on the course of freedom. But now that's being eroded, and when they eliminate that, game over. Anybody?
I would agree.
Right. Am I choppy now? Because I was going to try to bring something else up and show you, but am I coming through?
Right now you are. You're okay.
All right. Well, what I was going to do is I was going to bring up the terminology of useful idiot.
Yeah.
And I had a Merriam-Webster dictionary, but my computer is running too slow for that. But this is what they do. It's happening all the time. It happens in media. It happens in TV shows. If you want to push an agenda, you put the agenda into the context of the TV show. A very interesting TV show. I won't make any specifics, but you can inject it into movies. You can inject it into, this is how you would inject it into society. So if you have a narrative, you contact the studios or whatever, and you say, put this in and push this point. And they do it. People are being inundated by this all the time. It's happening in the regular news. It's happening in the entertainment. It's happening everywhere. People that hate Trump have been conditioned to hate Trump. I don't know if they're very informed. They only are informed of what the propaganda is. They eat up the propaganda and they hate Trump. Same thing, Alex Jones and others.
Well, on a more basic level, it's also, most people don't follow the news and don't really analyze like what's going on in Congress, what bills are being passed, what's in the bills and all that. So a lot of people who hate Trump, can't stand Trump, despise Trump. It's his personality. It's his roughness, and at times his crudeness that turns them off. But when people talk about Trump in those terms, I say, look, I don't care what the personality is. You judge a president and a politician on the effects of his policies. But people don't go that far. They just have a general perception of personality. Don't forget, most people vote emotionally, not intellectually. So if they like somebody, if somebody is personable, if somebody's telegenic, they have a big advantage over somebody who's stiff, who's logical and dry. Adlai Stevenson back in the 50s, he was too much of an egghead. A famous line, a woman came up to him and said, Mr. Stevenson, and when he was running for president, you have the vote of every thinking American. And he said, unfortunately, madam, I need a majority. So, that sums up how people vote. And the mainstream media, of course, is playing into that, where it's perception of personality rather than the nitty gritty of what's behind the bills, or what's in the policies, what's the effects of those policies. Mark, what do you think?
I agree. Manipulation, politics, kind of like I love what Rack was saying about people have been conditioned to hate Donald Trump. All they know is about the bad stuff, and I wouldn't say it's even bad stuff, but people I've talked to, their liberals, you mention any of the good things like the Abraham Accord, he cut taxes, he was trying to clean up the swamp. They know none of this stuff. They know nothing about the Russian hoax. So yeah, you see social engineering every day. It's just like, I'm sure this is a good idea of what Nazi Germany looked like during their propaganda run in the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, look at how much control Germany had, and the technology was crude compared to what we have today. And that they did a tremendous job with just using radio and movies and personal appearances and speech making. And by the way, if you look at the actual videos of Hitler and his speeches, he is compelling just by his delivery, the voice, the gestures. In fact, he was coached by a drama teacher in how to project something forcefully to an audience, and it worked. Again, it's technique, personality, surface stuff, which grabs people emotionally, so they don't have to think intellectually.
Yeah, Hitler was very charismatic. I mean, he just like, if you even I don't speak German, but just looking at when he gave the speeches, like you said, with those hand gestures, it's almost hypnotic the way he kind of does that stuff.
That's what I'm saying. I don't speak German either, but he had it down through a science. Like in some of his speeches, the crowd would be roaring and all that, and they had thousands of people assembled, waiting for him to speak. He'd come out and he'd just look at them and take in the applause, take in the anticipation of the crowd without saying anything for like a good 30 seconds, silence. And then he'd finally speak, and he'd start out softly and slowly. And then gradually he'd build more and more emotion into it, more forcefully to a crescendo. And, most politicians come on, they, bah, 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 bah.
Yeah.
He knew how to grab the audience right from the beginning. So again, before anybody accuses of being a Hitler lover or endorsing Hitler, we're saying the technique that they use, which was misused by Hitler, and it's also being used by other politicians that we're not comparing to Hitler, but we're trying to make the point of how people react to things emotionally rather than intellectually.
Well, and Hitler was, he was very passionate about what he did.
Yeah.
And he really, he knew the German people were really hurting from, the depression, inflation, and everything. And he hit that really hot and heavy. He identified a group of people. He said, your anger should be focused on these people. He pushed their emotional buttons.
Yeah.
And he was very passionate. And that passion flowed over into that crowd. So, yeah, it was mass hysteria.
In fact, and again, this isn't giving Hitler a pass on what he did and what he became, but what set the stage for the rise of Hitler or a figure like him, and this is universal in other societies, what set the stage for the rise of that was how the German people were really oppressed by the Treaty of Versailles, where they had war reparations combined with the Depression. The Allies really the victorious Allies really came down hard on Hitler after the war, on Germany after the war. And there was so much discontent and resentment of the German people. Food was scarce. Everything was in short supply. They were really beleaguered. So naturally, you get a rise of a Hitler-like figure who's promising to restore the economy and restore national pride. And you've got some of that with the rise of Trump, although, I don't think he was nefarious like Hitler, but people were so discontent with what was going on. And there was such a split in political philosophy that it sets the stage for a populist. And we've seen that before in the 1930s. Huey Long was a populist governor, haranguing crowds very effectively. He was going to run for president before he was assassinated. So, part of what allows the rise of figures like that is our own fault in terms of creating social conditions that create massive and deep discontent. And who's responsible for what's going on now?
Yeah.
Well, I have an answer to that. The New World Order. That's who's responsible. But anyway, This is a serious issue, and I'm hoping that someone somewhere will see our video, a regular person, and realize that constantly they're being manipulated. You have to be careful with everything you do. You read a newspaper, you see the editorialization, you know you're being manipulated. Magicians use it all the time. Here, watch over here while he's doing something over here.
Right.
Sleight of hand, gaslighting, manipulation, and it's being done all the time in regular TV shows, in regular movies. People just sit back and then they come out of the movie feeling a certain way, and they don't know why their opinions have changed.
Yeah. And again, as we've said before, the blurring of the line between editorials and straight news reporting, where in so-called straight news reports now, they inject these editorial opinions. They declare something fact without supporting what their claim that it's a fact. Like you hear the disgraced president, Trump. Well, in whose eyes is he disgraced? Not in at least half the country's eyes who support him. Or, Trump's a lie about election fraud. They just declare it a lie. They declare something as a fact, and where it's really opinion. If you want to state as an opinion, some people say this happened, other people say no. Explain it that way without just simply by fiat saying that this is fact. And that goes on all the time now in these news articles, including AP, which their articles are carried nationwide in the print media, and it's also picked up on by the broadcast media, is what's the AP is reporting. So it's getting worse and worse. without the First Amendment of free press unfettered, we're headed for total media control, information control by the state news in 1984. So unless you guys have something to add, I think we've wrapped that up for tonight, and we'll see all of you people out there that follow our podcast and our topics fairly soon with something else that's going to erupt in the news that's going to have a profound effect on us in one way or the other. So thanks for joining us. Thanks very much for being with us and staying with us during this, and we'll see you soon.